Let's dive into it. Since we last spoke, I did a little video last week actually. I put up the critique function, right? Remember the critique
Right.
and the history. So I did that one. But you and I have been chatting about style actually, and you've had a ton of great insights around capturing and perhaps mimicking and having the ability to speak in different voices. So maybe unpack that idea a little bit, and I've kind of done a riff on it today, and we'll see how close we got to it.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was looking at a number of podcasts, and I was really impressed with a number of styles that these presenters had put on, and like, man, I would really love to speak that way, or really love to, in my next presentation, maybe add a bit of that style. And so what I was thinking is using the prompt painter concept, could we almost reverse engineer that and try to capture styles? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a style from a person or a presenter. It could be a common style that I often use. So when I'm creating presentations at work, or if I'm writing creatively, or if I'm generating a report, I use different styles in all those pieces of work. And when I'm using ChatGPT, it's always an effort for me to banter back and forth with the chat to gain that style. So using the AI personality concept, using the prompt painter concept, using the work that we've been doing, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could capture a style and then use that style almost as a prompt brush? And so that's what kind of we've been talking about, and you did some pretty amazing work to bring that into reality, into sort of a system setting.
Yeah, and well, we're going to dive into that. You gave me an example, actually. You gave me Simon Sinek, and you the start with why, that famous TEDx,
That's right.
and that's I can't believe it's 14 years ago now. But you took that as an example, and it wasn't about the content of Start With Why and his idea of the golden circle. It was about how Simon Sinek delivered that presentation that that you used as an example. So maybe
That's
just
right.
as we dive in, like, you're not looking to emulate content, you're looking to emulate
No.
sort of sentence structure, tone, professionalism, I don't know, rhetorical flourishes, whatever you want to put, however you want to say it. um, and what about that particular presentation, or what about kind of a style, like what elements of that style resonated with you?
Yeah, so he is just such a great storyteller. I was just I was listening, and I was listening how he was presenting, and he really brings you in to the presentation. And then he gave examples, and he'd go back in history, and he'd give examples of in historical facts, and these are all things that I really enjoy. So to your exact point, I didn't want to sort of capture the content of why, even though that is a great podcast, or that is a great TED speech. I would. It was really the way he presented, and that's something I tried to capture there.
And I used that as inspiration, by the way, when designing this new tool. So you can't see it, but you'll see it in the video. But I'm screen capping. I use DeepGram, and I loaded in Simon Sinek, Start With Why. And DeepGram is a speech to text AI that is able to extract out all of the text. It does a very good job. It has a whole bunch of different models that I'm still learning. But what I was able to do is I was able to pull a full transcript off of that. And what's interesting, actually, it's the first time I ever watched it. I've been culturally aware of this presentation. I've never watched it in its entirety. So I watched it, and then I realized at the end of it, I did not know how to articulate what he was doing. I definitely found he was a compelling speaker, but I didn't understand what were the literary devices or the narrative devices that he used, and I couldn't articulate any of what was going on in that.
Right.
And so I sort of found myself, I'm someone who enjoys writing, but I'm not able to say, well, what did Simon do in that presentation to make it so impactful and make it such a like a mimetic feature of our last 10 years or 14 years that everyone kind of has this sticky idea, start with why now, and it drives a lot of narrative. So, but I had no idea what that was. And so I took that presentation as one of several different things to test. And I started to engage with the AI to basically help me unpack how to analyze this. And I was able to use that, and I could have used anything. It wasn't specific to start with why, but it was around. Anyway, I used it to develop a style framework, talking to ChatGPT to unpack what was going on in there, and that helped me get started. So that was actually my starting point. So you kind of gave me that, and then I riffed off of that. And we're actually going to use that Simon Sinek. We're going to create a style brush off of him today through the demo.
It's so interesting because a lot of professional presenters today are saying, well, you have to tell a story, but when you break it down, what does that mean, right? And so now we're actually getting into the granularity of what does it mean to tell a story.
Yeah, for sure. You should be able to see my screen now on the screen share. Okay, so perfect. So this is the latest version of Prompt Painter. We initially loaded it with just the ability to split segments and expand and contract. Those were our first filters. Last week I added the critique and then apply the comments. So this was a big boost for me. I loved the critique. Because one of the Chat GPT things, I find it uses cliche, and it uses this kind of really over-the-top amplification, large adjectives that no one uses in speech. And when it generates something and I hit critique, those are the top critiques every single time. The overuse of cliche, overuse of metaphor, etc. And then there's this negation thing where it goes, oh, it's not just a phone, it's a way of life, right? Where it because it puts this negation on it, and the overuse of semicolons, like those are kind of its trademark. But when I ran the critique through it, boom, it catches all of that stuff and says, okay, don't do this, you're overusing semicolons, you're overusing negation. And then you hit apply comments and all that crap goes away. And so to me, I was like, it knows it's writing cringy, lame type, right? Content. Yeah. And so when you tell it to do that, so that was kind of the first attack at style, I would say. And now we have this whole thing here. We have style. So we have capture style, add style, apply style, and then we have these style brushes that we can upload and download. So I was going to give a demo. I know you've played around with it, but I'm going to give a little demo of how I use it. Maybe we're using it differently. And then let's dive in and try a bunch of different styles. We can share styles now, which is pretty cool. So if that sounds good, I'll get going.
Let's get into it.
All right. So I'm going to start with Simon Sinek instead of start with why, but I'm going to bring in his transcript. So I'm going to paste it in. So this is the output from DeepGram, and it's quite long, right? It's about a 18-minute presentation. It does a really good job at capturing that. Obviously, it doesn't have the visual context of what he's doing, and he's writing on the flip chart and things like that. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit capture style. And I'll show you how it knows what to do, what it's doing. So I did give it an assistant in the background that is a style guide builder. And what it does, I gave it a template. So ChatGPT developed the template that it's populating, and now the assistant is filling in that template with the content from the presentation. And interesting enough, because we're going to get into concepts of like copyright and ownership, I didn't actually say anywhere that this was Simon Sinek and his concept of why from TED Talk. That's nowhere in the transcript. So clearly, GPT-4 has been built, has been trained on that because it immediately recognized what it was without me telling it. So that's kind of an interesting piece. But what it does is it breaks down style attributes like vocabulary, sentence structure, and rhetorical devices. And so these are the devices. I didn't really know how to articulate this when I was watching it, but these are some of the rhetorical devices. So like hypophora, when you ask a question and then immediately answer it. Anaphora, where you're sort of repeating, and then the use of metaphor, parallelism, and things like that. So I learned a bit from the rhetorical devices. Overall tone, inspirational, emotional range, curious, passionate, urgent, intended effect, to motivate and encourage the audience to think differently. So that's a good style piece. Narrative techniques, and then there's some textual examples, right? People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So there's some repetition of that. Very few people know why they do what they do. If Apple were like this, and so on. And then finally, I like this, the style profile. So it talks about his style, simple, powerful, and then there's some evaluation criteria at the bottom. So that's what was used. And then again, I know. Yep. Sorry, I'll stop.
Could we pause there just because I found this so interesting. So as I started playing and capturing different styles, and it broke it down this like a boss, absolutely. And it broke it down. It really helped me understand much better how people communicate. And it kind of, I never really thought of it before. And, we could talk about this later, but I actually captured my own style. And so when I entered my own information and my own writings and I start capturing my own voice and my own style now, I'm like, that's how I speak. And I didn't realize. So I could improve my own style now because it's breaking it down.
Did you agree with its style analysis on your writing?
I did.
Yeah.
100%.
Could you have articulated to somebody else how you write before you read your own style analysis? No, I couldn't either. I haven't brought in the book yet, like my digital ecosystems book, but I'm curious. I want to bring in the chapters and say, like, what did I do here? And what did I do well? What did I do poorly? So not only could I analyze the style, I could apply the critique, and then capture the style and see, well, do I like that style better? That's kind of interesting as well. And so, you're raising something that I think is absolutely crucial, which is we keep thinking about these things as generative AI, but call it critical AI, right? So put in your own content. Like, let's say somebody asks me a technical question, I write an answer. Before I hit send on that, I want a critique on, am I correct? Am I complete in my answer? Did I capture what the person was asking for? Is this productive? Is this open language? Am I using terms that would make people feel marginalized because they don't understand what I'm saying, so they're afraid to ask? Or do they feel like, hey, he's putting it in a way where I really feel engaged, that I'm part of the conversation, right? All these things matter in leadership and in communication. And so if you have critical AI as the lens you're looking at it, then you actually don't even need to use the generative outputs, but use it as feedback. And I think I don't know, like, I know some folks use it for that. I think we've largely missed that kind of narrative on Gen AI.
I think so. And I think this would go a long way to alleviate the fears of, will it take away my job? Because I'm using it to expand on my own thoughts. I'm using it to improve the quality of my own work. And so I'm not necessarily just copying and pasting what it gives me. I'm curating my own ideas, and I'm just making it presentable in a way that people will understand it.
Perfect. So now that we've captured a style guide here, by the way, we can do something with it. So I'm going to call this the Simon Sinek Y. So I'm going to add that as a style, right? Because he's had hundreds or thousands of presentations. So this is specific to his why. And then once I add that as a style, I actually have it here as a style brush that I can apply to any other text that I want to bring in. So that's my custom brush that I just created. And then I have some default brushes that I've built into the background. Positive communicator, clear communicator. So this one's kind of upbeat and very peppy. This one is just intended to be factual, unemotional, simple sentences, and direct. And so you could imagine that you could develop hundreds of different style brushes based on different literary modes of communication or different historical presentations. And the cool thing is then you can check them, and you can also check multiples. So if you want two different style brushes, you could bring in like Martin Luther King, I have a dream speech brush, and then you could bring in Simon Sinek Y brush, and then you can do kind of a merge there, and it might give you some interesting hybrid results there as well. So yeah, you can pick as many of those as you want now. And then when you bring, sorry, go ahead.
I wonder if I could like use my JP brush with like a 10% Simon Simic to make me sound a bit smarter, right?
Right. Well, start with sort of why, I guess. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Right now, it's just applying them. It's not applying a percentage, but again, if we go back to thinking about Photoshop and those other things, with like opacity and fill and those other things, those are all numerically driven. Like 10%, you know, color red fill gives it a pink tint or whatever. So absolutely, I think the sky is the limit. And then the last two features is you can hit download brushes, and so any custom brushes you create in your session will get downloaded to your PC. So you get this custom. Oh, you can't see it; it's off to the side. Custom style brushes.json gets downloaded. I'll close that. And then if you want, you can come back and you can upload that later. Just hit upload brushes and then pick. Right now it's one brush at a time, but that'll be as many brushes as you like, and then it will load them all back in. And so this is quite simple. But later we'll save it to your profile, so you don't have to upload, download every single time. But it is kind of cool that you could then create a style brush, send it to somebody else in a different organization, and then they could sort of they could apply that brush to their own thinking there as well.
I could imagine this. So this goes back to the sort of that original prompt painter concept. Is my idea was, imagine I could bring on my own palette. So I have a whole palette of brushes, and these are my custom styles. These are other palettes that I'm really really happy with. And like an artist, they come in with their equipment and they have their own palette, and you can start painting your whatever text in whatever fashion you want.
So I'm giving it a task here, and then let's try it. Write me a presentation on a product launch for this fictional holographic phone, which has no screen but produces a holograph. So think sci-fi. So we'll write that. And then, so right now it took the presentation literally as a PowerPoint slide, but maybe I'll change that. Well, no, this is fine. This is a starting point. So it has different slides, user experience, ecosystem, all of the things you might get in a product launch, pricing, call to action. And then, I'd be curious what happens when we apply the Simon Sinek brush to this. So I'm going to actually apply the style on top of it. So it starts with why we're here, the dawn of a new communication era. Welcome, thanks for joining. And then it starts with belief, right? He's all about belief in that presentation, a shared belief to galvanize and motivate people. We believe in a world where technology serves us. Today we introduce that. And then imagine a world where your phone is not just a device. So it really quite changed it in terms of some of that stuff. Some of its language is a little over the top, and so I'd be curious if I applied the clear communicator and then applied that style on top of it.
So one thing I would probably do here is I would probably in the special instructions convert this over to a motivational speech. And so could we try that if
Of
we
course.
make it all one segment?
Yep. It's still one segment. I haven't split anything.
Okay, so under special
Yeah.
instructions, just like make this into a motivational speech.
So now the presentation goes to motivational speech.
And now this is where I would start, expanding or retracting or adding different styles to this speech.
And that's a good point, because the brushes don't need to be applied to the whole thing. And in fact, in my testing, they work better when they're not. So let me put Simon Sinek just on this paragraph here. So it's changed it. It's changed it to
Cool.
right. So our mission is bold yet simple, to and a kind of an invitation towards a belief system, starting with the why, and so forth. And then because it's using a lot of negation. It's not merely a device. It's a belief. Then I'll actually see what happens when I apply the clear communicator. It's supposed to remove some of that stuff. No, it's still there. So there you go. So it simplified it down, right? So this was the original. this was the Simon Sinek start with why version, and then this was the kind of the clear communication. You see this, the sentences are a bit shorter, right? They have this kind of varied sentence length, but it's quite short. It's, eight word sentences and things like that. Yeah, so those are some of the different styles applied to it. And then of course with the history, like you saw before, you can go back and you can compare which one you like more. And then you can critique it, of course. Yeah, so that's the style thing. And what's interesting is you can get really diverse with it, right? So if I pull up like Hemingway and bring in a sample of Hemingway, so I'll just paste it in. Let's see if we can.
Oh, did you run the critique there? Is that what?
What's that? Oh yeah.
Did you run the critique under the?
I did. Yeah, I ran the critique. So you can see like the reach the edge of innovation is cliche and call to action is weak and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. So what I'll do is I'll clear this out. So I'll just say I'm going to merge all the segments and then I'm going to delete the segment and start fresh. So this is a Hemingway extract. So let's capture that style. So vocabulary, sparse, simple, concrete, nuanced, unadorned, short and declarative sentences, compound, complex, rhetorical devices, understatement, repetition, juxtaposition. So there's some of the things.
That's how Hemingway writes.
Yeah, apparently. Characterized by simplicity, clarity, and emotional intensity. So I'm going to save this as Hemingway. So I'm going to add that style there. So now I have Hemingway and Simon Sinek there on the side. And then if I, let me replace that with a press release. And then it'll be interesting to apply the Hemingway brush to this. Because it's completely, something you'd never write about, which is holographic phones probably. And then, press release completely at odds with something like that. But let's see what happens. So I'm going to put this into Hemingway style and then apply the style to it. So there we see those short sentences, right? Very punchy, unadorned, short, sharp to the point. It's completely different. It's a completely different presentation than it was before.
That is freaky.
Yeah, and then if I have it right, like, write me a short 3-word not 3-word, 3-sentence story about a blacksmith, right? So we'll see what it. Yeah, this is how it writes, right? This is how it default writes, and then I can say let's apply Hemingway. Completely different story, right? It's the same story, but look at it, because here it's using a lot of adjectives. The heart of a bustling medieval village, the blacksmith with a soot-covered apron, calloused hands. One day he forged a sword, mysterious ore. So then Hemingway, he hammered without stopping. The anvil sang. He made a sword one day. It had a strange ore. It shone like stars. It's completely different. It's a completely different tone of voice. And then, I don't know, let's apply Simon Sinek and see what happens here. Why did they come, you ask? There we go. So,
I love it.
So totally different voices.
Janak,
I love it, yeah.
Could we experiment here? I always like, since the beginning of this, I always use the ogre voice just to see if just to see the comparison. So could we write a quick story and use, but instead of going to capture an ogre voice, we're going to tell it to use an ogre dialect. Okay, so in your Let's Go, use an ogre dialect and then give it a bit of a creative direction here. So say what type of ogre is this? Is it non-intelligent or angry ogre, or give it some context?
Yeah, it's an angry swamp ogre, upset by the proximity of local knights. taking over his land.
Yeah, and then now give it some color around this ogre. Um, in the ogre dialect, it's from the northern swamps of Ogreland or something like that. And it'll come up with a weird style and use the style of the northern Ogreland people or whatever like that. So now it'll tell you a story. It should tell you a story with an interesting dialect.
Gather round, ye little runts. Let me tell you about the time when me, Gromar the hammer welder, was living in the thick, misty swamps up north in Ogreland. There we go. So now we have a story told from the ogre's point of view, and now you want to understand ogre style, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we've told a story because now you have an ogre brush you can apply to anything. Is what you're saying?
That's the whole point.
Okay, so we'll wait till it finishes the story. And so then we're going to capture the style. The name is Grogmar the Hammer Wielder. So vocabulary, gather round, runt, sentence structure, direct address, colloquial contractions, descriptive imagery, first person narrative, defiant and boastful, protection of homeland, rough, colloquial, and filled with bravado. That's kind of cool. So there's some textual examples. Regional dialects, tone, boastful, authenticity, imagery, emotional impact. Okay, so let's save this as ogre dialect. We'll add that style, and then what do we want to do? Do we want to go and go back to?
Yeah. Just so we see the comparison there.
Sorry about the blacksmith.
And now we'll just take a couple paragraphs, and just for the contrast, we'll turn those paragraphs into ogre dialect.
Perfect. So I could take a quote, or I could take a. You want a person talking, or do you want?
It doesn't matter. It's just really to see the difference between the writing styles.
See, instead of so here. Out of nowhere, a stranger shuffles up, his rags flapping like the wings of a bat fleeing the light. His mug was stashed neath a deep hood, and when he yapped, his voice scratched the air like a rusty blade on stone. What do you think you doin' creeping up in me for, Jay? I barked, me muscles bulging. Speak up or I'll smelt you into a shiny tin can.
Now imagine an author is writing a story, and they just write it, and then they have the styles of all their different characters that they've captured in their story, and they could just convert it over.
You see, it keeps reusing some of the things to start there. But the story is still there, right? So I'll just go like this. Right, you just take it out. So instead of here, he had forged many swords, each one a masterpiece. So now it's in ogre dialect, right? I've hammered out many a blade, each one a beauty, and the pride of ogrecraft, and so forth. So yeah, I think you could. What I would do is I would edit the brush, and I would take out some of those quotes that is overusing. And then the other thing with the brush is like I'm just going to download. I'll download one. But yeah, you can go in and edit it after the fact, outside the system, add in more things and do's and don'ts, and then the brush will get applied to the whole. Any of the changes you make to it will be there for next time. Super cool. Yeah, and then we can convert this to Hemingway on this one.
Great.
So there. I like it. I like the Hemingway. I think I'm going to start writing everything in Hemingway.
That's great.
Yeah, so I'll download it. And then you can upload it, like I said. And so we've got 3 different brushes. So if I download, so you don't have to check them actually. So just check and uncheck. So when you download the brushes, all 3 get downloaded here. And then when you come back later and I'll do an upload on the brushes. We should have all of our brushes here again. Yeah, so see now we have Simonson and Hemingway and ogre dialect when we start our session fresh again there. So yeah, I mean, what you described really is, you sort of said write it plain, and then go back and apply it. One of the interesting things, if I was using this from a storytelling device standpoint, like fictional storytelling, instead of applying the styles paragraph by paragraph, I could almost then take this concept one step further and apply personalities as I'm going, right? So JP, this is JP's sentence, this is Janak's, JP, Janak. And then what I would almost do is then apply the styles to the people, if you will, and then anywhere that person is doing so, they would do it in their own style, which could be interesting. That might be too, yeah, that might be too hard to nail there. So yeah, so that's the next phase of it. Where do you see it going? Where do you see it going next?
Yeah, so I guess I was looking at, okay, well, similar to Photoshop, you got different styles, and I was thinking, well, when I started using it. By the way, the way I use it now is for my for blog posts. So I enter my entire thought process or the concept or the framework that I'm trying to write, and I have it write me an outline, and then I expand it. And once I expand my outline, I could then go into different styles, or I could tweak the style, or depending on what I'm doing. So I'm noticing that there's different categories. There's physical styles that you're expanding text, you're reducing text, you're tweaking text, and I'm always directing it to say get shorter or a bit longer, or I'm going like this with my text. And then I'm changing tones depending on the message that I'm trying to say. So if I'm writing a communication to staff who want, I want it to be positive and upbeat, then I'm going to change to a tone style. And so I'm noticing these different paint prompt brushes as we create them that I could, apply different styles, tones, color, whatnot. So for me, it's really going to be to explore these different types of brushes for my own personal style. And then, as I mentioned earlier, is if I could capture my voice and have a consistent way to output my voice in the products that I develop, I could use sort of chat GPT banter back and forth to create my structure of my document. And then I could bring that to the paint editor and or the paint prompter to really refine and edit the message. And then ideally, if I could bring that back into my banter chat with the AI, I could then turn that into whatever I want, right?
You have chat, like think chat kind of one dimensionally, where you've got you, it going up and down. I would imagine that you would take anything you've said or it said, you sort of bring it sideways into the prompt painter window. You'd refactor it using whatever tone, voice, whatever, and then you could just bring it back and drop it right back in your chat. And when you said that, I also made me think that it would be nice to be able to select multiple different parts of the chat, maybe all of its outputs, or select outputs that you're happy with, and then move those into different pages, different artifacts, and then be able to work with it that way. So you're sort of separating the wheat from the chaff, in the sense that you're leaving all the banter set aside, and now you're really focusing on where you've ended up with the output. And I think that's quite powerful.
Because that's what I think a lot of people are struggling with in the chat is they're bantering back and forth. They get to a place where they need to get to, and then they continue on and they almost lose where they left off with, right? So you're constantly copying and pasting into an alternate document there.
Yeah, and then what I've found, like I mentioned before, is as I add new requirements, it drops old requirements into its latest response rather than preserving them. And I find myself having to go far up the timeline, because you could be dozens of pages along, taking the old version of this and the new version of that, and then trying to like pastiche them together into this like new thing. Whereas, there's even, let's just store that, kind of what Claude is doing. I like what Claude's approach of the artifacts, although I think this goes a little bit farther, because every piece is an artifact, and you can always go back to it. And what you're really extracting out is the amalgam of all those. I wanted to ask you one more thing, because we're talking about how you and I use it, I consider ourselves to be sort of a little bit more experienced, only in, at least in terms of volume for the amount that we've used these tools. But then, how would you apply it corporately? Like, if you had a comms team, for example, would you sort of build, work with them so they could build a brush that's their own comms brush, and so every, press release or whatever, or update, then, even social media post, whatever, they can write whatever they want to write, and then for the audience, they would apply those themselves. Like, how would you see a team using
Yeah,
it?
yeah, that's exactly the sort of the direction I would take it, and not just for comms, for any team. So for a policy writing team, for a regulatory writing team, let's say, or let's use the comms team for example. So one of the things that sometimes organizations struggles with is to have consistent styles and messaging. And if you have 5 different employees and they each have kind of their own unique writing style, as a corporation, you want to make sure that you have somewhat of a consistent brand in your writing. And so I would almost create my brand guide using my our specific corporate voice, and then individuals could still add their touch and still add their flair, but you're painting a style guide or corporate voice over top of that to make sure that you're consistent.
And then would you see a second piece for the individual? Like, for example, let's say, I don't always write the email that I have in mind. I'm busy, right? And maybe there's a style that I want, as that's my professional tone. It's my professional voice, and I use it always at work. But instead, I could just say, hey JP, here's the document, and then before it gets sent, I apply my professional tone to it, and it kind of reads the previous email, and then based on that, it's like, "Hey JP, thank you for your request. I talked to the team, and I found this document. Here's the document number. Here's where you could find it. Here's a little context on the file. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to contact me. We're always here to help you." Right? I don't want to write that every single time, but if I know that that's my professional persona voice, then I could actually apply that to all of my outbound communications, even amongst a team. And I'm not being fake about it. That's what I want to say. But as an artifact of my time, I don't necessarily always write that well. Um,
That's exactly how I'm using it today, and I have a whole gamut of different styles that I write in. And sometimes when I need to get something, so there's an emergency at work, we need to write to somebody important or an important office. I need to take my rough notes and turn it quickly into a professional briefing note. That's how I use it.
right. No, that's smart. So you would let's I'll end it here from my own kind of curiosity standpoint, but would you publish your own voice for your staff to use in the sense of that? Or like, hey, you know what? You know, Jose from communications is away right now. She's on vacation. And, the junior person or the student or, somebody else outside the team, they need to respond. I'm just going to go pick her voice.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I'm there yet. I think creating a team voice, I think creating a corporate voice is good. I think if anybody wants to use my style, that's a great question.
Well, could you even stop them? They'll just aggregate your emails, everything you sent to them. They'll run it through the style guide, and then they'll have your voice, right?
Let's ask Simon Sinek.
Well, he would say why. He would start with why, right? So awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. I would love more of your feedback. The next thing that I wanted to talk about for where we go, I've been trying to build a couple of models for some tools, some agent tools. And what we have here, we're not really using any tools yet. And I think that's an important next step. And what I mean by a tool is, if you take an assistant description, but then you give them the ability to activate something. You give them some degree of agency, or you connect them to an external data set, or you connect them to another assistant into a process. I consider that to be an agent at that point. And so, when you talked to me about Simon Sinek, I was thinking, oh, well, I would just give somebody, I would type in like clone this voice, drop in a YouTube URL, and then if it was an agent, it would have the ability to find the video, download the video, convert it to audio, convert it to a transcript, and then apply the style guide, and then publish that brush into your brush library, for example. Like that's what I would consider an agent could do. And so, I think the next thing I want to explore with you, if you have ideas for tools that you would want your assistants to be able to do, there's tons of stuff. There's web scraping, there's checking an API, there's producing a document, there's sending a request and then waiting for a human to activate something before it gets back to you. So asynchronous interactions. So I think next I wanted to go on the agent side of things, although we have been talking about taking the prompt painter to its logical next step with this idea of multi-page documents and simultaneous synchronization between segments as you change. That's another way we could go. Anything you want to see next?
Well, I do have a bunch of manual steps that I typically do to prepare my content for getting into the chat banter and for getting into the prompt painter. And if there were tools available, like you mentioned, the transcription is a big one. So I've got a number of transcription tools that I use. I use it especially with all the most recent phone updates. Everyone's adding transcription as an automatic AI feature. And so getting content from one format to another is always something that I do manually to get it prepped, and that could save a lot of time.
Look at that audio, like speech to text is quite easy now. There's so many APIs and so many different models that do that, very well. It would just be sort of adding in the microphone button. So, you could almost speak your ogre dialect, if you will, into the microphone, and then it transcribes it. And then then you click the button, build me a style based on this, So yeah, give some thought about the key things you use. You gave me one really good use case there. If others come to mind, and then what I want to do is probably in a 2 to 3 part series with you, define what an agent process looks like, and then build it as a set of tools, and then show how the AI can discover the tools from a tool library, select the right tool, and then go on and complete the task. And then because tasks take time, though, then we might have to also think about how does the agent come back to you when it's done. Like transcription, I think of Simon Sinek took, 3 minutes or something like that to fully transcribe it. So maybe what we go into now is, instead of just having a chat, maybe you and the AI have a task plane, if you will, where when it kicks off a task, it says, hey, JP, I'm doing this for you. And then on the task plane, when it's done, then it comes back and says, hey, I've completed this for you. And what you have coming out of it is an artifact that you can drag into your chat, or that you can do something else, right? Like I've created a brush for you. Great. Save it to my brush library. Or I've created a brush and saved it. Would you like to click here to see your brush library, or something like that? So I'm really interested in these simultaneous, like I can have a chat over here, but now I'm working with my team of agents on the side, and it's almost like Slack, where I can keep an eye on the channel, I can see who's doing what, and then I can take an action when I'm ready. And so
that's cool.
Yeah, so that,
like that.
that might be a way that we handle this idea of the agent going and doing a long running task or something like that.
What one of the things I'm thinking that we're going to have to do at some point on the brushes is, how do you tweak the brush? And do we add the AI personality framework based on your brush conditions? So your brush conditions, and then you add sliders to that to tweak it, or remove because I think we're also we're mixing content and approach. So the Simon Sinek Ask Your Why is the approach, but the style is unique, and you could probably have both as separate individual brushes.
Yeah, probably. If you look at the style template that I showed up on that it generates on the screen, we can simply expand to that with a numeric set of attributes down below, where you could have like professionalism, clarity, consistency, whatever those sliders were. And then I could imagine like we could just take that object, because that's a JavaScript object that you're seeing, and we can render that into a user interface to make all of those different attributes editable as well, right? So when you have a style brush, you just render it as, you know, text boxes, sliders, and things like that, depending on if it's numeric or textual, or a table if it's an array, right? And so if we rendered it that way, you could take any style brush of any kind of format, drag, you know, or click it, and then edit it in a user interface, add in your own sliders, your personality, and then save it, and then it gets saved back to the JavaScript object. So, yeah. Okay, that would actually be probably a logical next step to wrap up this part of the prompt painter, and then merge in, because if we did that, we could actually eliminate the personality framework as a separate thing, I think. And then maybe when you're chatting, you're not only picking like let's say you go into chat mode, you not only pick the assistant you're chatting with, maybe you also pick the style within which it's chatting, and then you can change it. You could change either one concurrently, because then that would solve your personality framework at the same time.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well,
Awesome, man.
awesome. Well, thanks a lot. Enjoy the beautiful day behind you, and yeah, we'll set up the next one soon.
Cheers, brother.
Okay, take care. Bye.